Hey, it's Ed, and welcome to EDTalks. Really excited to have a friend of mine, and it's Dan Dodson. He's with UNC, and we'll talk about his title here in a second. But Dan, you and I first met in person, I don't know, like a year ago, maybe?
Yeah, I think a year and a half. Yeah, something like that.
We had a dinner together. I was in your part of the country, and we just really hit it off because we had some personal experiences that are shared, which we'll probably get into towards the end. And then I just love what you're doing in terms of patient experience, patient engagement. The things that you're doing at UNC are pretty spectacular, and so we want to dive into that as well. And yeah, so it's just like, hey, this is a cool person, and they're doing cool things, so I want to have them on Ed Talk. So again,
Awesome.
thanks. So I always like to start off by asking you, like, especially since it's your sort of profession on the healthcare side, what's been your best customer experience this past year?
Yeah, I mean, within the UNC Health world, I think, a lot of it's been how we're trying to marry up a lot of our digital ecosystem together. So we've put a lot of focus into not only the products, but the infrastructure and data behind that. And so, we did a great partnership between a couple of our key vendor partners where we were able to marry up sort of some text messaging into our mobile app, and it was a unique experience. And so, that got a little bit of press, and it was just a neat opportunity to showcase some of that.
Yeah, that's really cool. What about yourself personally? What's been a non-healthcare like for you? Like it could have been at the local grocery or someplace, but have you had a meaningful experience that you thought, oh, that'd be kind of cool if something like that was in healthcare?
Yeah, we may get into a little bit of my background, and sort of I come from a little bit of a different traditional background than others maybe in healthcare, but I'm really into like what you can do on your streaming services and how easy they make it. So when you're trying to log in and you've got the QR code and you just hit it and it goes to your phone. And now the fact of all these different things you can do on your phone. And I'm a mobile first guy, so and we'll get maybe into that why that is the case. But I just think the ability to pay your bills, stream your services, check in, it's so seamless. That's pretty cool stuff. And it's just getting better.
I have a nephew, a couple of nephews, and they've taken over their 100-year-old telephone company, that came through their family. But of course, now
Sure.
more than a telephone company. But those two young men, because they're in their 20s, they grew up in a digital age. I mean, they've revolutionized that whole industry to the point that AT&T and the
Yeah.
big companies, they're like taking a look like, who are those guys? And
Yeah.
gosh, they might come up chain and eat our short. So I love what you're saying. What's one thing that your parents forced you to do that looking back, you're glad they did? Maybe at the time you weren't so happy about it, but like looking back, you're glad they did.
Yeah. A good question. It's sort of funny. I'm a Gen Xer, and so it's like, my parents didn't force me to do anything. It was back in the days of like that whole commercial of, do you know where your kids are at 10 o'clock? But one thing that, they sort of encouraged, and I guess, they didn't force it into me, but when I went to college, I went clear across the country. So it was one of those things where, and this is back before you had the internet and virtual reality, and you could go tour a campus and know everything about it prior. You sort of got the shiny brochure, and that was it, and you just showed up. And so it was one of those things where, I thought it was. I, as two kids who have gone, I've had two kids who have gone through the college, and there is something about, yeah, you want to keep them sort of close, not super close, but close enough. And this was a little bit different. So
Yeah.
probably that was a little bit more so.
Yeah, that's cool. Tell us a little bit about yourself, personal and professional, however far back you want to go. Lead right into sort of UNC.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that mobile background. So I started off in healthcare when I have an engineering undergrad, but I went and I worked for a company called Siemens Gamma Sonics out of Chicago, building nuclear medicine, gamma cameras, and different things like that. But quickly moved into a whole different industry. So I went into the wireless industry back in the early days. I was with Sprint. Uh, and it was really when we were moving from 2G to 3G. So this was moving from analog to digital. So when we talk about digital transformation, that was the true digital transformation. And I spent the majority of my career in the wireless industry. So talking about your nephews, so I started with, I was with Sprint for a number of years. I was with Virgin Mobile with Richard Branson for a number of years, starting up that startup. I've worked for Verizon and just a bunch of different wireless companies. And around 2010 or so, when the High Tech Act came out, and all of a sudden there was all this talk about moving to electronic health records, and I was like, all this stuff I'm doing on mobile phones, I always joke I helped invent all the stuff that wastes your time today. So all those things that you do on your phone, games and the streaming services. And I thought that's really applicable to healthcare. And so made it, I was consulting at that time actually, and we started up a little group to focus on mHealth, but that was back in the meaningful use days, and everybody was just trying to, what is an EHR and how do I get this thing to work? And so that's really what sort of drew me to say, maybe I'd like to be on the other side of the table and work for a healthcare system. And that was sort of the start of switching career paths a number of years ago.
Yeah, that's very cool. And so today you're the system director for digital health and innovation, or otherwise known as a digital evangelist. So
Yeah, yeah.
how long have you been with UNC?
So I've been with UNC for about 6.5 years. So in the scheme of some folks within the healthcare, they're like, oh, I've been there 25 years. So it's relatively new, but when you think about the digital space, that was sort of early days. If you say you've been doing digital health for 20 years in healthcare, then maybe that's not what we would think of as digital health, true digital health.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So what does it look like for digital support the mission and vision? So how do you do that? Do you take the mission and vision of the organization and then you have strategies and then you align digital with it? Just how do you think about it?
Yeah, so and for folks who may not be that familiar with UNC Health, so we're a healthcare system in the state of North Carolina. We're owned by the state of North Carolina. We go from the coast to the mountains, 14, 15 hospital system here. And so one of the things that my CIO just mentioned to me a day or so ago, it was to a group of us, but North Carolina is the second most rural state under Texas. And I was surprised by that from being in North Carolina for a number of years. But that's one of our true things that we look at is how do we help those rural and underserved markets? That's where I think digital health really makes a difference. And so when I look at this, I come from a whole different perspective. And I come from, with that wireless background, it was a very competitive, consumer-centric, patient experience. So I just brought that over, assuming like, well, that's what everybody does. And so that was sort of a learning. Healthcare's got its nuances. There's a lot of governance. There's a lot of, how do you work between hospitals and different groups? But yeah, that's, we sort of use digital as a tool to sort of enable that mission.
Yeah, and I know, patient experience is really important to UNC Health. And so what are some of the things that you've done or teams have done to sort of, help with that particular strategy?
Yeah, I think, a lot of it was just, in the early days, even though 6.5 years doesn't seem like a long time ago, there wasn't a whole lot. We had some mobile apps, we had a couple of different things, but really telehealth, when we stood that up and that was, 2019. And then as we all know, 2020 was, changed the whole world within that. So really getting an early start, getting just that etiquette, understanding, all those different pieces. But that patient experience, text, we really built out our text messaging platforms that go beyond just appointment reminders. We use that for bi-directional texting, for campaigns. Nobody answers the phone. Nobody talks on the phone. Everybody texts. And that's not just your young, demographics. That's, 8 to 80, right? And so those types of things, obviously with my mobile background, I really try to push that. And then we've created some of the platforms, the CRM and those types of things to really try to understand our patients and consumers. And I know sometimes that was viewed as a dirty word. My provider friends would always say, oh, no, they're patients. And it's like, they're still consumers. I mean, we're all consumers. And so that was something that we really helped build.
I remember one time I was interacting with one health system and we used the word consumers. They got really offended. And then the next one, use the word patience, and they got to fit,
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So
um,
it can be both.
how do you collaborate internally? So your customers, your internal customers,
Yeah.
like up with these platforms or these different ideas, how do you make it happen?
Well, it's part of that governance process. So we have a work group or part of our overall governance with, I'm in ISD, which is just our term for IT, but we have a whole structure within there, and there's a digital health and innovation work group. And within that, we have about 24 people within that work group. But these are the leaders across the whole enterprise who range from marketing, chief marketing officer, chief customer experience officer. We've got, folks from our health alliance, our operations, just all across the board. And that is really the team that I bring a lot of these ideas to. And so sometimes, we come up with these ideas organically. Sometimes it's just, you see what's going on in the industry, or once again, those like, you're at home and you're, on your streaming TV and you're like, hey, why can't we just connect the dots like they do? And so it comes from a number of spots.
Yeah, no, that's great that you've got that work group and the key participants that you mentioned, and from an enterprise point of view. Same sort of question, but with vendors, because that's always can be tricky too.
Yeah.
You think about your one or two key vendors. How do you best collaborate with them?
Yeah, I think it's, we truly work as partners. And so, there are some vendors that you're buying a service and it's commodity, right? Or you feel like, okay, you're just there, you're a lot of interest during the sales cycle, right? And then you move into the product and it sort of changes that dynamic. So I look for those partners who stay engaged and really continue to evolve their platforms. So that's a key thing, because I'm, I'm always just doing the what if. I've got that curiosity of like, well, why can't we do? I guess I don't know better to some extent, right? It's like, well, why couldn't we just do that? Why can't we have that in this work? And so having partners who will entertain that and say, well, yeah, let's see, and sort of work with you to help develop, evolve it. So as the UNC Health organization, we're much better buyer and integrator versus builders. We don't have huge development staff, so we have to rely on our vendor partners to do a lot of those things.
Yeah, and I would think, as a vendor, that I'd be thrilled to death to have someone like you that was giving me that sort of feedback and sort of
Yeah.
our roadmap and helping us. I want to ask you like one or two things that you're most proud of, but I want to talk about wayfinding as well. Are you all doing wayfinding as part of your experience?
Yeah, we have internal wayfinding through 7 of our hospitals here in the Triangle area, which is Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, so what we call the Research Triangle. But and these are our larger hospitals. So we started off at our Med Center, which is our sort of home campus there in Chapel Hill, which is about 5 or 6 hospitals on this campus, built on a hill, Chapel Hill. So like as you're moving, in the underground, you can switch and you get lost pretty easy. And then another large hospital in Raleigh. So we've implemented that. And then we also have it, just the wayfinding to get to a lot of our ambulatory sites and different areas to get you driving directions to that front door.
Yeah, I remember back in the old days, there was like color coded duct tape on the floors and
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I go over there and I have to pack a lunch because I'll get lost down in the basement and never get out unless I have my app.
yeah, it's kind of like Disney, with all the underground, a lot of the hospital campuses,
Yeah, yeah,
underground tunnels and stuff.
exactly.
Where do you get your ideas? So, you're obviously a creative person in a creative role. So how do you come up with new ideas?
We have forms and ways in which just folks within the enterprise can send us ideas. I'm a big fan of, just seeing what's going on within, the healthcare system, either down the street or across, in the next state over. We all have our different ecosystems, although we're all sort of facing the same issues. So, I could hand over, my roadmap to somebody else, and it may not be applicable just because they have a little bit of a different, infrastructure or culture or whatever. So I just, I'm always looking at, what's going on. Within LinkedIn, things like that. Folks like yourself, I love to just see what you guys post and say, okay, well, what's happening out there,
Yeah.
and try to piggyback on that and say like, okay, well, in my world, how can I take that idea and sort of make it UNC
Yeah.
applicable?
Yeah, that's really cool. I think I cut the last question short a little bit because I was more curious. I was curious about wayfinding, but is there like one thing that you're most proud of so far? And then we'll roll into what are you thinking about, like one thing in the future. So one thing you're most proud of so far, and then we'll hit into the future.
Yeah, I think, a lot of that is tying into some of that wayfinding and that seamless experience. And so marrying up those partner, experiences where vendor A and vendor B, getting them to work together to create experience that's very cohesive for the patient. So like they don't care that you're using this vendor for this piece or that vendor. It's like, once again, I just want it to work and I want it to be easy. And so if you always sort of use that as your core foundation, sometimes you have to hop, across different platforms. But we were able to do some really cool stuff in that space.
Cool. And is there like one thing that you can share about the future, like where you'd like to head in a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we, as well as the rest of the healthcare industry, we have a lot of focus on AI and sort of this new stuff. And having lived through digital health, there's always the hype cycle, right? We were all talking about blockchain and cryptocurrency. That was such a hot topic a year or two ago. Now nobody talks about that, right? So AI is sort of coming up. It feels different in the sense that there are so many different avenues. We're doing some specific work. We've announced it. We're doing work with Microsoft and Epic on implementing that with our MyChart. And so we're trying to cut down, try to help our providers with some of that MyChart messaging. We're looking at the, Chat GPT and some of that internal, and really finding, ways to utilize that safely and sort of in a controlled way. So we certainly aren't just throwing it out there to the masses, but that offers an opportunity to tie into so many different things, from our website to our chatbots to our mobile apps. So I think that's really going to be the area that is going to be the topic of discussion until at least the next shiny thing comes down. But I think it'll be around for a while.
Do you think it's different? I think UNC is your first healthcare organization, right? That you've served.
Right.
So this question may be a little more difficult to answer, maybe not. But do you think it's a little bit more pressure when you're in an academic medical center, like to do some of the cutting edge things? Be first out there, bleeding edge sort of thing.
Yeah. So yeah, and I mean it's used obviously in when radiology and different things. It's a lot of this has been around for quite a while in those spaces. So as an academic medical center, we do look at how to use that. From my perspective, I'm still a little bit more on that patient user experience and maybe not quite as much on the research, although we're going through some new initiatives here at UNC Health, and that's one of the things we really want to focus on is how do we bring that research and really sort of promote that. And so I see those lines crossing here pretty quickly, like, well, okay, how do we promote some of these things? How do we use some of these tools to sort of balance back and forth and sort of bring those things to our patients?
No, that's what makes AMCs, I think, particularly exciting. All different kinds of, I love all different types of hospitals and health systems. All of them serve a really important purpose, but that's kind of fun part of being AMC. So let's move into leadership and something that you really, a phrase that you have that really caught my attention because of some common things that you and I have done on our personal lives is to own your own rescue. And so what does it mean? And you use your words, those were just my interpretation.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Yeah, and it's I think we were telling the story. It was 20 plus years ago on a whitewater rafting trip in Colorado. It was the guide, and she actually said it was a little bit different, but it was participate in your own rescue. And I thought it really resonated because it was the whole idea of like, hey, if you're in the raft and you fall out, participate in your own rescue. Try to get back. Don't just lay there and wait for somebody to save you. And if you think about that in just life, it's not to say that you have to do it all on your own. So that own your own rescue may imply like you're responsible 100%. Participate in your own rescue means you have to contribute to it, right? So if you see something that you don't agree with, try to change it. If you don't like where you are or what's going on, try to change that. So there's just some ownership, and it's funny because it was this off the cuff comment, and 20 something years later, I probably reference it, once a month, at least in some different situation.
Yeah, and as you know, yeah, that was a shared experience, and I had to participate in my own rescue video.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, those are some crazy stories.
It's so fun to see that again. What's the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
Um, it was, I think maybe switching careers and making this, it was, some people may fall into technology or health IT or different things. I mean, I made a very focused decision and actually went back and got a medical informatics master's degree because I was like, okay, I've got my other educational background, engineering, MBA, all that stuff, but I didn't really have healthcare experience. And so I was like, okay, how do I get into this? I actually had a recruiter once tell me, you can't get into healthcare. Like it's almost like you're born in it, you can't just get into healthcare. And so that was sort of a gutsy move. Like it was a long con and it played out because UNC Health was truly there when I was like, because I was in this area in North Carolina, I was like, I could work for a company. That would be the healthcare system I'd want to work for. But switching hats is a big risk.
Who gets credit for hiring you? Who was it that brought you in?
Yeah. So Matt Castellano and Brent Lamb are CIO, and Matt's the VP of Business Enterprise.
Kudos to them because
Yeah.
people like you that I think are helping us accelerate and push forward in innovation and transformation because you do come from the outside. And your comment was right. And I know you didn't mean it in a negative way, but it was very accurate that it's what you have to be born in it, right? And so
Yeah.
as a result, we haven't had a lot of external influence come in. And then the fact that you then come in and then get a master's in medical informatics, I mean, that, kudos to you. Yeah, you're already like a rock star to me, but now it's like it's exploded even past that. So that's pretty awesome. Hey, one last question before we sort of wrap up, and that is, how do you
Sure.
recharge your batteries and you just remain fresh, in your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, well, part of it, and I know you're a triathlete, and you go out and do all sorts of really crazy stuff, but I'm a mountain biker. I used to coach a youth team, and that's something just I think just getting away from the the office and just sort of refocusing. And anybody who's ever mountain bike realizes that you've got to focus. It's sort of like a meditation, and you've got to make decisions fairly quickly, right? You're going down something, you got to figure out like, how fast do I want to hit that tree? You gotta make sure that you're understanding how to do those types of things. So from personal life, I think that's something just to sort of disconnect and stuff like that. Like once again, I'm always exploring all industries, everything. And so I don't just look at healthcare when, from a business perspective to try to keep fresh. I'm always just looking for ideas and I'm a big fan of that increment, even though my title is digital health and innovation, that incremental innovation tends to resonate much more than this radical. When you're always swinging for the fences,
Yeah.
you're going to swing, you're going to strike out a lot. And sometimes you need to just keep the ball moving, keep momentum.
Hey, that's really good counsel. We've talked about so much, Dan, and I don't know if we missed something or if there's something we talked about you want to double down on, but I wanted to leave you with the last word.
Yeah, I think just once again, with I think healthcare as a whole, it is certainly shifting a little bit more and more towards that patient engagement. Consumers are not, that's not a bad term. That's something that we really need to embrace and understand that, we saw that through the pandemic where people were using their phones to order food and groceries and video visits and vet visits and dry cleaning, whatever it is. We've got to continue that momentum. I'm afraid that once now that pressure's off, there's a tendency to maybe slide back to what's comfortable. And we've got to keep being brave and keep sort of moving that ball forward in that momentum. So that's one thing that I would hope that the healthcare industry as a whole continues to do.
Yeah, that's a great way to end this Ed Talk with that affirmation. I completely agree with you. Dan, thanks again for being part of Ed Talks. You're super bright, a great person, a great leader. I'm so glad you made that switch into healthcare. And thank you again for being on our show.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Ed.
All right, that wraps up Ed Talks, and we'll see you on the next drop.